Test, test, double checking. Please ignore me, everyone. Just doing a quick AV test. We good? Hey, everybody. We are going to get started here shortly, so if I can ask folks to find a seat, get comfortable, we will get started here just in a minute. All right, everybody, we are just about to get started. The last thing before that is I'm going to call up the folks. If you've got your raffle ticket, pull that out, take a look at it. I'm going to call up 10 folks to ask a question. That won't be till the end of the program. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to get to every question, so I have drawn 10 here. Just looking at the last 3 digits, if folks could come over here to Jeff, who's going to wave. I will be over there. He'll be up here talking. It'll be great. So 718, 709, 716, 713, 721, 710, 6, 714, 708, 705, and 720. If those folks could come up here, that would be great. Again, everybody check your tickets, come up here. I will meet you over where Jeff is currently standing. Thank you much, folks.
All right. Good evening, Tri-Cities. My name is Jeff Strickler, and I serve you as chair of the 16th Legislative District Democratic Party and as a member of the State Democratic Party Executive Committee. Last week, I was at a private event where Congressman Baumgartner started his remarks claiming that protesters across the country are being paid and that they are all blue-haired socialists. I look at this room tonight, and I've got a very different word for the people here. Voters. Whatever your politics, we the people live here in the Tri-Cities together, and we are all affected by the disastrous policies of this federal administration, and we deserve to be heard by Congressman Newhouse and Baumgartner. Tonight, we come together as a community to hear stories, support each other, and find ways each of us can have a voice in our democracy. We're going to hear from local community leaders and our Attorney General, Nick Brown. As you came into the building tonight, you were asked if you'd like to ask a question or share a story about how things like the big ugly bill will affect you. We're going to make sure to leave the majority of our time together tonight for all of you brave enough to tell a story. To start our evening, I'd like to introduce a candidate in the 14th Legislative District last year, a board member with Grace Collective, Progresso, and many other local organizations, and your Franklin County Democratic Party Chair, Ana Ruiz Kennedy.
Yep, I'm short. You know, it's funny that when, at times where people are not stepping up, then you are left at the last, with the last position, so, you know, they call you a leader then, so but my name is Ana Ruiz Kennedy. Good evening. Thank you for being here. When I first came to Pasco, I saw a city that was thriving, buzzing with opportunities for all that wanted to pursue the American dream. Immigrants opening businesses, kids that went through the K-12 system in a dual language program, young people going to college and graduating and then returning to their communities, starting families, buying homes, staying here, coming back. I have seen our local school districts recognize that our most precious asset is their diversity and therefore invest in their bilingual education, then doubling down in investment in dual language and STEM education. Tri-Cities and Pasco has been the fastest growing metro in the Pacific Northwest for the last generation. When we ask big employers, why are you coming here? Why are you opening? They always say, because it's their reliable workforce, the school system, and the diversity, and the rich culture. While we are growing, while immigrants were contributing to our communities, paying taxes, opening businesses, buying homes, the anti-immigrant sentiment was brewing in the background. There are organized efforts to remove immigrants, to remove our constitutional rights, openly admitting that this administration is profiling us, threatening to even revoke our naturalized citizenship if we choose to speak out against this administration. If we choose to speak out against this administration, this acts when they said that we are destroying their democracy. Immigrants pay taxes for those institutions to exist. They support Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and our public lands, our public system, and many others. Just here in Pasco, in Franklin County, we have a board of commissioners who are currently undermining the Keep Washington Working law and are actively working to form a coalition of other Eastern Washington counties to undermine immigrant protections. What Trump and his administration are doing to our immigrant communities are causing them to live in fear. Their families live in fear, our kids live in fear, our businesses are suffering, our businesses are closing. What do the commissioners think? How do they know? Do they even recognize how do we get funded? It's through sales tax, through property taxes, from the very people they are attacking. What do they think is going to happen down the road without these local taxes? We all know we are in a state of emergency. If history serves as a lesson, let's look back at how those generations got out of the mess they were in. We are here because we all see what is going on and we want to be part of the resistance. Thank you for being an active member and for caring for what we will leave to the next generation, because our kids deserve to live in a country where they can live to achieve their American dream and their fullest potential. And our first line of defense is our legal system and our dedicated Attorney General. Thank you, Attorney General Brown, for taking actions to uphold our Constitution of the State of Washington and the U.S. Thank you for all you do to protect the people of Washington and to uphold the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. Next up is a former congressional candidate, a community leader, constantly trying to seek for new voices in our community. Benton County Chair, my friend Jane Muchlinski.
All right, this is like a tiny tyke stage we got here. So, hello everyone. Yes, I'm Jane Malinsky, Misty Malinsky, Birdie Malinsky. I've got lots of nicknames, and just to let you know, Anna, Jeff, Nick, and I are all Gen Xers. We grew up in a generation of nicknames. So, and we're all proud of that, and I'm very proud of that. And if we look like we've been living off of Starbucks and anxiety, you're not wrong. And being a candidate is incredibly challenging and difficult on our bodies, on our families, and on ourselves. It's expensive, it's exhausting, and it's absolutely worth it. Being a Democrat in Benton County, though, can sometimes make us feel like we are outliers, or we're in a secret club, or living in an episode of Desperate Housewives sneaking Bree's secret macaroon recipe. People whisper their support or slip notes like it's a covert operation. And we've got to change that. So visibility matters. We need to be, and not just with cool slogans and signs with cool colors on them, it's about speaking to what matters in people's real lives. Housing, jobs, school lunches, and yes, TikTok if we have to. I don't want to. As a Gen Xer, we raised a generation of young people to be inclusive, thoughtful, and unafraid to speak up. So let's stop being afraid to be seen ourselves. But our neighbors are not going to jump the fence and shake our hands if we choose not to listen to them. And honestly, why should they? We're so set on being right sometimes versus winning to fight what is right. We also need to show up where it counts in other ways, at school board meetings and city council sessions, not just to be angry and vent, but to collectively and professionally bring solutions and ideas. Ask the boards, what do you need from your community? What can I do to help you? Because what we're facing in our schools is truly no joke. My husband is a principal in Mattawa. Mattawa School District is 99% Latino. Thanks to Trump-era education cuts, which just happened, they are frantically bracing for larger class sizes, fewer resources, stable job cuts, and a system that fails the very kids in which they serve. If you're not for public schools, for the love of recess and big girl juice boxes, please don't run for school board. And please do everything that you can to not allow those folks to be elected. Our schools desperately need us. We have built schools, the public school system, and these are our tax dollars at work. And what a waste of our tax dollars if we allow them to dismantle all of that hard work. And it's not just schools either. Small businesses in rural areas are suffocating under red tape, housing out of reach for young families. Meanwhile, real estate moguls get louder voices than the people who live here. That's not you, Jeff. 5,000 kids just graduated high school within 30 miles of where we're sitting right now. 5,000. Where do they go? Where do we expect them to go? Where do we expect them to live? Where do we expect them to work? Adults in positions of power and management have failed so many young people in this country by their lack of forecasting and planning. To me, these areas needing attention required common sense thinking. But common sense has become a luxury and a swear word all at the same time. So let's bring back what truly matters and what that truly means to have common sense, kindly, boldly, and together. We ask, how can we help? Not, what side are you on? Our neighbors shouldn't feel like enemies, and our political allies, the folks on our own team, support the candidates with questions on how can I help you? Where do you need me to show up? We are underrepresented, and we've got open PCO seats left and right waiting to be filled. And the job is cake. It's connecting with people. So many folks are begging to go back to the good old days, but this is what they're truly meaning. Connection, stability, working together. So no more mean girls politics. I'd rather team up with Beavis and Butthead than deal with internal drama. So let's stop competing within our own team. And as a former candidate, please reflect upon my words. Extend the olive branch, step into the gap, speak with purpose, and listen with your heart. We're all living the reality show Survivor in real life without preparation. Let's get prepared with strategic messaging and showing our community we matter, our friends matter, and our kiddos matter. And so do our neighbors, friends, families, and kids. We have someone on our team with one of the hardest, most important jobs in politics and probably the best survival skills in Washington. He showed up prepared and with a strategy, and he's putting it into action. Let's follow that example and keep showing up. And I personally want to say thank you for all showing up today alongside the coolest cat, Nick Brown.
Thank you, Anna and Misty, for the amazing work you're doing here with the Benton and Franklin County Democrats. So, our next speaker is a bilingual educator with 9 years of experience in the Kennewick School District. She's a union member and advocate. Pasco raised, Pasco mom, Pasco proud, running for re-election this year, your Pasco School Board President, Amanda Brown.
Thank you for having me here tonight. It's an honor and a privilege to be in front of you. This isn't my first Democratic event that I've spoken in at, but it is the first town hall. So as such, I feel the need to tell you that there was a day when I was a Republican. And I was recently reminded of this fact because my partner looked at my voting record and Vote Builder to make sure that I was girlfriend material. I passed the test because I've recently been identified as a Democrat. But on a more serious note, I want to talk about why I identify as a Democrat. And it's because it's where I find the people that I share values with. Those values that I see reflected in my community are what I do and why I ran for school board and why I work hard in my classroom every day. And so when on the second day of Trump's presidency, when he issued executive orders to recall diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, I felt that in my core because those are my core values. And when Trump, on July 1st, withheld federal funds that affect migrant students, ELL students, and students of Hispanic nationality and origin, I felt that because I'm a fourth grade dual language teacher in Kennewick School District. My school is 85% Hispanic and 37% English language learner. Pasco School District is 75% and 37% English language learner, 75% Hispanic. And so I feel that. I feel the disconnect. And so I have to wonder, how do I serve as a school board member and as a teacher and still remain true to my core values when our federal funds are being pulled and not allowed, and we don't have the funds to be able to serve the students of whom I see myself in because they, just like me, are hard workers and are looking for a better life. And when it becomes difficult to meet federal law like IDEA and ADA, because as we all know, the big beautiful bill is recalling Medicaid and changing regulations for SNAP benefits, which you know that SNAP benefits is how we qualify children for free and reduced meals. And so when we take away and make those regulations harder to meet, we take away food from hungry children. And that Medicaid dollars pay for speech therapy, occupational therapy, and for transportation for our disabled students to school. And we cannot meet federal law when federal dollars are taken away, but we will because it's federal law, and schools will find a way, but it will not be easy. Across the nation, schools are facing budget challenges, and teachers and principals and staff will find a way because we always do, but it won't be easy because those are our core values. We have our attorney, Nick Brown here, AG Nick Brown, who is, I'm sure, doing his best and knows these court cases much better than I do. But when we hail back to where we are today and how we got here with cases that came out of California, Mendez versus Westminster, that ensured that brown students received an equal education in California to their white counterparts, that then paved the way to Brown versus Board of Education, which made sure that on a nationwide level that we made sure that our students of color were receiving education in adequate buildings with adequate teachers and educators, which then paved the way for Lau versus Nichols, which makes sure that ELL students have curriculum that they can learn from. which is all under fire right now under Trump's federal withholding of funds and his executive orders. So out there among us, I know there must be more people like me who are looking for a place where they belong, where their core values can be reflected. And I hope that we as a party can be the people who embody diversity, equity, and inclusion without a party name, that we will include those with who we see our core values. Because there are people like me who are seeing that this is injustice and who are looking for a place where they belong. And they can be here with us, but we have to accept them. So let's be the party of the core values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you.
So I got to tell you, as I was preparing a bio for Attorney General Brown, it doesn't say anywhere on your state biography that you were on Survivor. How is that not on there? I mean, this should be the first item. Anyway, all right. So last week, I attended a Realtors Government Affairs conference where Democrats and Republicans alike agreed, Nick Brown is the most exciting up-and-coming leader in our state. And you can see why when we look at his background, okay? He paid his way through college by joining the ROTC, graduating from Morehouse, and then going on to study law at Harvard. Nick served in the Army like his father, where he began his legal career and was awarded the Bronze Star in 2005. He worked as lead counsel for Governor Jay Inslee and in the Attorney General's office with Bob Ferguson during the first Trump administration. In 2021, President Biden nominated him to become the U.S. Attorney for Western Washington. In all of these roles, he has served the people of this state with distinction, fighting drug cartels and sex trafficking, fighting the Muslim ban, addressing the fentanyl crisis, and reducing violent crime. I know him to be a friend of Eastern Washington, and it is an honor to have him here today. Please join me in welcoming Attorney General Nick Brown.
Good evening. Good evening, Tri-Cities. There we go. I appreciate the introduction, Jeff, and really listening to my three counterparts, Anna, Misty, and Miss Brown, no relation. Thank you for letting me join today. It's really great to be back in the Tri-Cities. And even though I've been in public office just for 6 months, but in and around politics for a long time, I'm still surprised when Survivor comes up. I hope none of the 10 questions are going to be about Survivor, but if people have questions afterwards, when I was a young law student and decided to sign up for this new thing called reality television, my Army retired colonel father was less than pleased with his Harvard-educated son, but it turned out okay. So I always like to remind my father that it all worked out just fine. Let me just say first, it really is good to be back in the Tri-Cities, to be back in Eastern Washington. I've spent more and more time in this area. When I worked for Governor Inslee, traveled out here a great deal, working with our court systems and law enforcement and some of the tribes in Eastern Washington. And as the Attorney General, we have offices all across the state, and I spent some time this morning in our Wenatchee office and then earlier this afternoon in our Kennewick office, and it is a pleasure to be back here in Eastern Washington. And I just want to thank everyone here for coming to hear from me and from some of my colleagues, and so we can hear from you as well. And despite all of the hard work and long hours and stress that comes with being the Attorney General of Washington State, it really, truly is an honor to be in this position. And despite all those things, I'm also having a lot of fun in this role, and I never want to miss a moment to emphasize the value and the enrichment that I get being in this position. Because at this moment where we're really looking for joy and love and inspiration, I have so much damn fun being Attorney General. So thank you for those of you who helped me put myself in this position. And I also just want to spend a moment lifting up the people who work for me on your behalf. The Attorney General's office is the second largest law firm on the West Coast. I have 834 lawyers who work for me on your behalf, another 900 or so professional staff of legal assistants and paralegals and policy analysts and legislative aides, all of whom are doing a great deal of work. And we have 13 offices across Washington State, from Port Angeles down here to Kennewick, and I get to work with some of the most dedicated public service servants in the state. And I always want to lead with that, because at this moment where public employment is discarded and derided and cast aside as being invaluable or of no value, I get to see the work of these public servants, the vast majority of whom will never get the highlights or the headlines that many of you read about our office. But I know that the work that we do matters on a day-to-day basis when it comes to public safety, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, when it comes to civil rights, environmental protections. The work that we're doing really does impact your lives in ways that sometimes you may see and sometimes you may never see. And I'm really proud to be in this position where we're doing everything we can to try to make this a better state. And also, that means from time to time, we sue the President of the United States. And I appreciate the applause, even though it may not be universal. And I hope there are people here today who really support what we're doing. And I also hope there are people here today that disagree, because your voices matter as well. And I represent the entire state, not just Democrats or people that agree with me politically. And it's really important that you're here. And I also, you know, as much as I am proud of our work that has generated the headlines, and I'll spend some time talking about that federal litigation, it does sadden me a little bit, to be honest, that so much of our time and effort is spent on protecting Americans from their president. And I don't say that lightly. As Jeff said in my bio, I started my career in uniform as an active duty JAG officer, spent a year deployed to Baghdad. When I left the Army, I had a decision about what I wanted to do next, to either work at a big prominent law firm in Seattle or continue my public service career. And I chose to join the Department of Justice. I was hired under the Bush administration, under a Bush-appointed U.S. attorney. I spent 6 years working for the Department of Justice. I came back as the U.S. attorney for Western Washington. All of that is to say I love this country. I truly do. I believe in its opportunity. I believe in its promise. I believe in its people. And it saddens me that so much of my work in this moment feels to me like we need to protect Americans from their president. And that is why, as of this morning, we've filed 27 lawsuits against the administration. And I have a little bit of inside information that we have some more in the hopper. And our lawsuits have touched on things that are going to impact all of you. They've touched on things that will impact smaller segments of Washington, institutions and people. They've also touched on things very essential to our country's foundation. Indeed, our very first lawsuit was challenging the Trump administration's executive order around birthright citizenship, where the president tried to redefine what it meant to be an American in this country, not through an act of Congress or through a congressional amendment, but through an executive order. And ever since then, we have been very mindful of looking at every single executive action to see whether or not Washington State should lead or join a case. And for a little bit of context, we've joined 27 lawsuits. I think all told across the country, at least one of my Democratic colleagues has led a lawsuit, so we're upwards of 30. So I have not joined every lawsuit against the Trump administration. There are some where I felt like it just didn't reach the level that was necessary for us to join, or the harm to Washington wasn't nearly as clear to me, or where I thought, I really don't like what the president is doing, but it might be perfectly legal. And so I have not joined every lawsuit that's been potentially on the docket. On the other hand, at this point in 2017, we had filed about 4 lawsuits. So the fact that we're now at 27 reflects a couple things. One, that we are much more prepared for this moment, that this office and Democratic attorney generals all across the country had been working collaboratively over the past year and a half to research and analyze all of the things that then candidate Trump was saying on the campaign trail, analyzing things like Project 2025, even though the president disavowed any knowledge of that. It's clearly been the playbook. And so we were prepared for this moment. And the other factor that has led to really this deluge of litigation is the fact that he has issued more unlawful or unconstitutional executive orders in the first 6 months than ever in history. And it also declared more emergencies than any president in his first term. And my test is always very simple. I look at an executive order, and our team analyzes, first and foremost, is this illegal or unconstitutional? As I said, there are things that the president is going to do that I don't like that might be perfectly legal. There are things that were passed in that bill last week that I think are abhorrent, that are going to harm people in this state, and in particular on this side of the state, that might be perfectly legal because it's passed by Congress. So we first look to see whether it's illegal or unconstitutional, and then is it harming Washington? Is it harming individuals in Washington or Washington institutions? And then lastly, should Washington participate in a case? Is our participation necessary? Because my resources are finite. I've got a big team, but they are stretched thin and working incredibly hard. And I don't want to join a case unless it is necessary to protect Washington's interest. And I do, every now and then, I make the mistake of looking at my official Twitter account, and not everybody loves what I do, including, I think, your mayor. I'm not sure if he's still here, but he was here earlier. And that's fine. The criticism is okay. But I think the most common critique that I get from people is, why don't you focus on issues here in Washington when we file a federal case? And I don't know if people who raise that complaint are simply naive to what we're doing, or want to create more divide and divisiveness in our community, or simply don't like me personally. But every single case that we have brought against the Trump administration has to meet that test of, is it harming or impacting Washingtonians negatively? So when we filed one of our early lawsuits challenging the illegal cuts to the National Institute of Health, we filed that case in the District of Rhode Island with 20 other states. And I didn't do that simply because I didn't like what was happening and it was abstract, but because we were protecting hundreds of millions of dollars to institutions here in Washington, including University of Washington and Washington State University. Indeed, all told, of all the lawsuits we've brought in just 6 months, we have successfully protected over $10 billion of proposed cuts to Washington. And the good thing is we are mostly winning, not universally. In fact, there was a decision today that paused one of our lawsuits challenging the cuts to the Department of Education, getting to some of the concerns that Amanda raised, where the Supreme Court, I think quite inexplicitly, let the Trump administration continue to make those cuts as the lawsuit continues on the merits. That's going to harm Washingtonians, it's going to harm Washington children, and I think it's abhorrent. And so I want to be very transparent. We are mostly winning, but we are up against some real challenges at every level of our court system. But I will continue to do what I think is right and use the Washington State Attorney General's office in the best interest of this state, as long as you'll have me in this position. But the work that we're doing on the federal level really just represents a fraction of the overall work. At any given time, I might have 30 assistant AGs who are working on some case involving a federal action. And the other 800 are working for Washington State universities, institutions, agencies. We represent every board and commission in Washington State. They all have lawyers who are working on your behalf, who are trying to better the services that we provide to the public. And there's so much good work that's happening on a daily basis that's never going to get the headlines that happens when we sue the president. And I'm just really thankful to be in this position. And the last thing I'll say, and then I know we've got questions and I look forward to that, is that, I think maybe the most common question that I get these days is, are we in a constitutional crisis or not? And I certainly understand why people ask that question, but I think for the most part it's fairly academic. Because I don't really care whether we're in a constitutional crisis or not, but I really do truly believe that we are in a crisis. We are in a crisis. Whether it's constitutional or not is purely academic. Because I think not only of what we're seeing immediate, but the actions from the federal administration are going to have lasting impacts on this country. And the real test of how we get past this moment is not going to depend on the work that I'm doing or frankly of anyone else in public office. It's going to depend on what you all do and how we continue to interact with each other, whether we lean into listening to each other, whether we continue to tell the truth despite all the misinformation, whether we show up in our communities, in our volunteer events, in our churches, for our kids. That's how we're going to continue to get better and thrive and make this the country that it can be. It's not going to be because of an attorney general. It's because of people getting together for communications and conversations and discussions like this. So that's why I'm really proud to be here, and thank you all for coming, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, howdy y'all. I'll be right in front of the speaker. So those folks that we chatted with at the beginning will have the chance to ask your questions now. Will, if you could come up.
No pressure, Will. First question.
Hi, thank you for answering some questions. I'm Will, the Vice Chair of the Chelan County Democrats. We met yesterday. I was born and raised for over 20 years in Tennessee, of all places, where the Second Amendment right and God, it's all that matters. However, we're in very interesting times. I've never personally wanted a gun or any of that stuff, but I live in a predominantly community where it's nothing but people of color. And they're afraid to go to work, they're afraid to go to school, they're pulling their kids out of schools. And at one point, I guess what I'm trying to get answered and figure out, because I don't want to have to start carrying a gun, don't believe in it, but again, we live in interesting times, is there's ever going to be a scenario here in the state of Washington where someone has a gun, as in their legal right, their Second Amendment right, and they're defending their property or their community or, for God's sakes, their children. And since the federal government isn't identifying the people who work for them, and let's just say, hypothetically, I have a gun, someone comes in to look for what they call an illegal person, and I shoot and kill that man. I know the federal government will come after me and the courts of law, but would you, as Attorney General, or any of the attorneys working for you, how would you guys react to something like that? Because it's against state versus federal.
Yeah. Well, let me say a few things. I started my legal career, as I said, in the Army JAG Corps, a year of which was spent in Baghdad. And I carried an M16A2 assault rifle every day to work. So I spent a lot of my early part of my professional career shooting and being trained how to shoot, even though I was just a lawyer. I'll never forget my first convoy through Baghdad with a bunch of lawyers and paralegals with guns sticking out the window. I was like, man, I hope we're okay. And I just say that to highlight, the Second Amendment and the constitutional provisions or protections around that are pretty well established at this point, and that's a right that we will continue to protect. At the same time, I think we need to advance more and more gun safety laws in Washington, and we have done that constitutionally in a manner that I think will ultimately keep people safe. But to the heart of your question, every administration for the last 50 years has done deportations, has done immigration enforcement. Since ICE has existed as an institution post 9/11, presidents of both political parties have exercised their federal authority to enforce federal immigration laws and deport people. And that was true under President Biden and President Obama and others. What we are seeing now, from my perspective, from the Trump administration, is not that. It is a real violent, inhumane attack on people of color and a disregard, I think, for their basic humanity. And we have all become somewhat numb to that. And, it was really crystallized for me, for the folks that remember the first Trump administration, we're all old enough, there was a time when they were detaining people coming across the border and putting children in cages. And it was a huge story. And the president kind of obfuscated and denied and tried to explain, and his administration really shied away from that news story. Fast forward to 2025, the president and the Secretary of Homeland Security and all of his supporters cannot wait to get to Alligator Alcatraz and have their picture taken. They cannot wait to show the pictures of people in the prison in El Salvador that is one of the most inhumane carnal institutions in the world. They celebrate it now. And not only that, we're seeing students being detained because of their First Amendment expression, students in college campuses all across the country. And most alarmingly, in the last few weeks in particular, we're seeing people be kidnapped essentially off the street by people who are not masked, not identifying themselves, and putting it in unmasked cars. And I think that creates a really, really dangerous situation, not only for them, but for all of us. Because as you rightly highlight, how would you react if someone came up to you and didn't identify themselves and didn't have a clearly marked uniform and tried to grab you and put you in a car or handcuff you? Most people, many people at least, would want to fight back and defend themselves or defend their children or family members. And I think it makes it unsafe not only for the people that are on the receiving end for that, but also for law enforcement. And we've also already seen people pretending to be ICE to do carjackings and thefts and robberies. We saw most poignantly to me the murder of a state senator in Minnesota when somebody showed up at their door pretending to be a law enforcement officer, and the state senator, trusting that it was, opened the door. And so I think what we're seeing is not only going to impact those people most directly targeted, but it's going to impact everyone, and it's going to make us less safe. I cannot tell you how to react in that situation. I'd like to say you'll be okay defending them yourselves, but I just think violence begets more violence, and law enforcement is always going to get the benefit of the doubt. But that fear is real, and I think we need to exercise our voices to change some of these practices. For the most part, I cannot, as Attorney General, have any impact on whether or not ICE decides to wear masks or not. It's outside my authority. We wrote a letter in support of a bill from Senator Murray and some others to try to limit that practice. But I know as a politician, letters mean only so much, right? I think the way that we change that is that we get back to what we did in 2017 when we voiced our collective outrage about kids in cages. We need to be doing the same thing when it comes to unmasked vigilantes, purporting to act on behalf of the president. I didn't know when I agreed to do this, by the way, that it'd be 100 degrees outside. I can see people fanning. I'm just a poor West Sider, so.
Thank you, Attorney General Brown, for joining us this evening. I have a question related to the Keep Washington Working Act. Can you speak to a little bit about what your office is doing to enforce and defend that law, both locally, such as in Franklin County or Eastern Washington, but also with regards to the Trump administration, and more broadly, what your office is doing to protect immigrant, migrant families and asylum seekers in the state of Washington from the Trump administration?
Sure. So for people that don't know, anyone doesn't know, in 2019, the state legislature passed a new state law called the Keep Washington Working Act. This was a law that essentially set some limitations on law enforcement and others about how they could cooperate with federal immigration enforcement officials doing civil immigration enforcement, civil as opposed to criminal immigration enforcement. So state law limits the type of cooperation that any local sheriff or police chief can do when it comes to cooperating with ICE or Homeland Security around civil immigration enforcement. It prohibits certain types of communications and assistance. And that was passed in 2019. The AG's office, under my predecessor, was required under state law to then develop model policies for local law enforcement, for schools, for hospitals, for other organizations that would be consistent with the Keep Washington Working Act. It is the way that we keep federal enforcement separate from state enforcement. The first thing I'll say is, for the most part, when I talk to law enforcement, either WASPIC, the Sheriffs and Police Chiefs Association, or individual sheriffs and police chiefs, for the most part, they don't want anything to do with immigration enforcement. They may not like Keep Washington Working Act, but for the most part, they'd rather focus on their bread and butter public safety issues. And that's not universal, obviously, which I'll get to, but for the most part, they don't want any part of it because they recognize that, if they're out there reporting people for civil immigration violations, they lose public trust. And this is most acute when it comes to domestic violence issues. If you are a victim of domestic violence and you happen to be undocumented, the likelihood that you will report violence that you were receiving is decreased if you think your local sheriff or chief is going to turn you into ICE. And so you just stay silent and you don't report those incidences. And that happens time and time again. My job is to enforce state law. Whether I like the state law or I don't like the state law, my job is to enforce state law, and I take that obligation really seriously. There's lots of state laws that I like, and I feel consistent with my values to enforce, and there have been a few where I've decided to continue to enforce where I just disagreed with the policy, but it's the law that was passed by the people through initiative or through the legislature. So we have continued, not only in my 6 months, but really in the last few years, trying to work with local law enforcement to get them in compliance with state law. It's a somewhat confusing law, and so we help them develop model policies. We've worked collaboratively with now dozens of law enforcement agencies to review and approve their model policies. We get reports from the public about reports of cooperation with ICE or Homeland Security that we think violates the state law. I don't just sue, we flag it for them and try to get them in compliance, and for the most part, local law enforcement has come into compliance with state law. We had one case that I decided to file in February or March against the Adams County Sheriff in Adams County because they were blatantly, our allegations are, they were blatantly disregarding state law. And for me, it's laid out in our complaint, but we, the Attorney General's office, had tried to work with Adams County for over a year to get them into compliance. We met with them in Adams County and virtually. We showed them reports and all the receipts of where they were violating state law. They said they would come in compliance. They did not. And then after Trump was reelected, the Adams County Sheriff essentially pushed aside the county prosecutor that represents him, hired Stephen Miller's America First law firm, and cut us off from collaboration. So we sued. And they tried to remove it to federal court. We fought that and are back in state court. And we're not seeking penalties against the sheriff. We're not seeking punishment against the sheriff. We're simply seeking a court declaration to say that the Keep Washington Working Act prohibits what he was doing, so we have clarity for everyone. And so we will continue to do that in that case and any other future case. My hope is to work collaboratively. I don't like suing public officials. It's not, I wish we didn't have to do it in that case, but we felt it was necessary in that case. And that's the best tool that we have to make sure that people have more trust in government to not get engaged in federal immigration issues. It's getting hot in here, isn't it?
No, Harold is a Democrat.
Go.
Thank you. My name is April, and I'm speaking as a former retired bilingual teacher, elementary school principal here in Pasco, and a superintendent in California. And I know firsthand how important free and reduced lunches are to children because they can't learn on an empty stomach. And I wondered if you could comment on any efforts that our state is doing to join other lawsuits, or I'm worried about fall and the school lunch program here in our state.
Well, first, thank you for your service. You know, on my drive over here, I stayed in Wenatchee last night. I was listening to a podcast as on long drives I try to do. And it was a podcast that was talking about, this is a total aside, but it relates to you. It was talking about how in America now, and frankly much of the world, we've really idolized what we think people are geniuses, and mostly in tech and in business, in a way that we don't lift up people like teachers or superintendents or any other public servants. You know, we lift up these tech bros who are innovating, most of them, some of them, but not lifting up teachers. So thank you for your work as a teacher. You know, our ability and our good news is kind of mixed when it comes to this. You know, as Amanda highlighted and I touched on a little bit, we have brought as an agency some initial lawsuits against some of the cuts to education. The one that we got bad news on today from the Department of Education that was cutting is about half of the total employees of the Department of Education. It's going to have an impact on people here. We filed a new lawsuit today that is challenging some of the grant funding that Amanda was talking about, because school districts across the state were anticipating getting money on July 1st that would hit for their fall budgets to fund all sorts of educational needs. And they didn't get it on July 1st. So $5 billion total dollars across the country and $71 million into Washington. School districts in Eastern Washington and Western Washington, they were anticipating on that money to fund things like bilingual education, to support students in their schools. And the idea that you would cut that, it's either going to go away, or as Amanda sort of highlighted, we're going to have to find another way to pay for it. You know what that means? Your taxes, your need, you know, and our resources are finite, and we can't continue to expect that we can just remove tens and hundreds of millions of dollars from federal funding and life will just be the same. And it's going to harm people, and it's going to harm children. We haven't had the ability, at least from our perspective, to quite challenge the SNAP cuts or the food needs that children have. As I said, there are cuts to SNAP, to Medicaid, and the bill that was passed last week. At least right now, we don't think there's a legal avenue to challenge any of that. It's an act of Congress. But if there are ways via executive order, or if there are challenges that we can bring, we will certainly bring them, because I recognize the harm to Washingtonians. So I'm happy with some of our results in the education space, but there are things that are going to happen that, at least from the AG's perspective, that might be out of our ability to change or to halt.
Hi, I'm here. There's a couple affiliations I want to mention first. First, Indivisible of Tri-Cities. We are 16 weeks old, and I'm on the leadership team. The other thing is I am a Democrat. I represent LD 8 as a state committee rep. But I'm also in a new group called Friends of PNNL. So it's a combination of people that have family affiliated with PNNL or retired people from PNNL. And just today, at about 3:40 p.m., the bill for markup that includes serious cuts to EERE and 50% cut to BER through the HR 1, which is basically
You're using a lot of acronyms, so.
Science, science, science.
Okay.
That's what it's about, science.
That's just
okay?
for me, and you might
And
be
we
following.
have here a gem right here in Eastern Washington, which is the Pacific Northwest National Labs. It is amazing what they're doing for energy, renewable energy, the climate. But they're in the crosshairs right now. So because it is now out of the subcommittee, and by the way, Newhouse voted in favor of moving it forward, 10-5, Republicans 10, Democrats 5. So this means at risk are 1,100 jobs at PNNL, most of them highly skilled research scientists, almost all of them. Because of those 1,100 jobs, approximately 2,500 ripple effects of jobs will happen in this area. And we are in trouble in Tri-Cities, but we don't even know it yet. We don't even know it. When I say this to people, they don't know it yet. So I'm just here to say that and to say, you know, what's going to happen to science when all these scientists are out of jobs and they start going elsewhere, and that our edge in the world in terms of science is eroding, and then Denmark and China and New Zealand and Australia get our talent, and people don't even go to graduate school anymore in this country. We don't attract people anymore. So that's just general. I don't know if you have any perspective. I don't know if there's anything about that, but I just want to make that known. Thank you.
Thanks. First of all, hi, Andy Miller. I spoke at Indivisible Conference this last week. I don't know if you were there in Tacoma, and I see some other representatives. That's the first time I've been asked, how do you save science, in my first 6 months. I've gotten good at answering, how do you save democracy? But I don't have an easy answer for that. But I think you highlight a real sort of important point, because you know, we can disagree, reasonable people can disagree about the level of funding for government and the type of environmental protections we should have and all sorts of things. And what we should not do is see those changes come via executive order in disregard for Congress, in disregard for state sovereignty. You know, and so the lawsuits that we've been bringing on behalf of you from the Attorney General's office are founded on that idea that reasonable people can disagree, but you should pass a law to have that debate and that disagreement, and whether that's a state level or federal level. And when we see cuts, they're going to have not only immediate impacts on those institutions, but all the down chain impacts. You know, those are some of the things that Anna was highlighting. You know, we can create this climate of fear for the immigrant community, which is happening. But when those businesses shutter and the tax dollars go down and all these downstream effects, there's so many things that are happening now at the national level that, you know, you may not feel, or other people may not feel they should be concerned about it because it's not them. It's such a naive idea that it, you know, if it doesn't impact you directly, that you don't need to be worried about it, because it's going to impact you in one way or the other. And when we brought that lawsuit challenging the National Institute of Health cuts, you know, it was over $100 million to University of Washington, I think over $30 or $40 million to Washington State University. So that was one, you know, cuts to institutions, the jobs associated with those funding sources, the research that they're doing on things like cancer and, you know, healthcare and innovation, and the idea that you can do all those things without impacting, you know, a generation of people is so naive. And the attacks on foreign students who are coming to America to lend their brain power here, you know, the attacks on them, the literal kidnapping of some of them, it's created an environment where those students aren't coming here, which means they're going to lend their expertise and their brain power either to their home country or to some new country that's going to welcome them. And if you think that we can continue to be the leading beacon when it comes to technology, innovation, and all these things by eliminating that brain power, you know, oftentimes it's not only illegal, it's just plain stupid. It's just bad policy. And it's going to have a lasting impact. And, you know, I think for years to come, we're going to see a real brain drain of people coming to this country who are, you know, you all know, this country and this community in particular is founded on and supported by so many immigrants. You know, Washington State has a huge legacy of being a welcoming place for immigrant communities who come and create and, you know, create businesses and add their voices and their funding to our community. And by the way, commit less crimes per capita than citizens of this country. So it's I don't have a silver bullet for that. You know, again, if there's a thing the president does that is illegal and harmful to Washington, and Washington State has standing to bring a case, we'll do that. But it's going to take more than that moving forward. No, it's okay. No. It's okay. Go ahead.
My name is Anne. Thanks so much for coming out and doing this town hall. I have a question kind of about the Supreme Court. And I'm a nurse, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician, so I'll put that out there. But I'm wondering when the Supreme Court, which is one of our guardrails for our democracy and, you know, keeping our democracy going, when our Supreme Court is acting in a way that honestly I feel is dismantling a lot of our democratic institutions, what can, you know, how do you handle that? Like, what can the state attorney generals do? For example, you know, the ruling today that came out that, you know, they can continue with the firings at the Department of Education. So when Congress is the only one that has the authority to initiate and shut down government agencies and institutions, but then you're effectively, I feel like it gets a little into semantics, when you're effectively doing that by continuing mass layoffs. I guess my question is, when the Supreme Court rules in a certain way to allow these actions to proceed, but it goes against our democratic principles, is there a role for state attorney generals and what can be done?
Yes and no. Let me say a few different things. And you know, one, a lot of people don't recognize the Attorney General's office is the only revenue generating agency in Washington State. We make money on behalf of the public, and every case that we fund against the Trump administration is funded by the money that we have recovered from our consumer protection cases and antitrust cases. And so with the money that we spend on these cases is generated by that, not by taxpayer dollars. That's one. Two, you know, there are things that the Supreme Court does that I don't like. They reach decisions that I think are wrong on the law, but I am never going to be an attorney general that says we should ignore what the Supreme Court does. You know, the president loves to bash judges publicly and vilify them and call them stupid or liberal judges. And even though the rulings that we've been getting on his executive orders have been issued by Reagan-appointed judges, Biden-appointed judges, Trump-appointed judges, pretty bipartisan disagreement with the president. When the Supreme Court of the United States issues an order, that's the law of this country, whether we like it or not. And so we have to find ways to respond to that consistent with our democratic values. And the one thing that I would say, or one of many things that I would say, is that as much as our attention gets driven to DC and to the president, and that's true whether it's Trump or Obama or Biden, we spend as a community, as Americans, we spend a lot of time focused on what's happening in DC. And far too little time focused on what's happening at your city council and your county council and your state legislature. You know, every year, the Washington State Legislature passes somewhere between 300 and 500 bills that impact your taxes, your public safety, your health care, and for the most part, now this may be a different audience because you guys come to town halls, but for the most part, people don't pay attention to that. And I truly believe, and I said this when I was a candidate for office, but I truly believe the things that we most care about, 90% of them are happening at your state or local level and not Washington, D.C. And so, you know, I think we have to find ways to have our voices heard at a local level. And so if we see things that are happening at a national level that we don't like, we need to find out, are there state solutions to some of those issues? And they're not easy solutions, but if the Supreme Court issues an order, you know, it's my job that's the law. And I have an oath of office to our Washington Constitution and to our federal Constitution. And so I have to advise my clients and the public about best ways to pivot and find solutions if we've been hindered. And there's going to be more things that the Supreme Court does that I don't like or that I think are wrong on the law. But they're justices and I'm just an attorney general. So we're going to continue the good work.
And I lost track of our next question asker. Margaret, are you still right here somewhere ready to go? Thanks. There you go.
Well, you know, a lot of my questions have been, and concerns have been put to, in more focus now since I've attended this meeting, which was my main purpose is finding out, you know, I'm close to 90 years old. I have 14 great-grandchildren, and I'm concerned about leaving this world and what they're going to be facing when they grow up. So my questions were all over the map because I have never seen anything in my entire life like the situation we're in. And my main concern was the Constitution and how one man can and get the power that this one man has and avoid all of the Congress is not doing their responsibility. They're not stepping up. The Republicans are not stepping up to their responsibility as Congress, as part of the checks and balances that we've always had. And to find out what we're doing as a state has been very helpful to me, and to try to know where my voice can be heard more louder than just, and I know that's important, contacting your representatives. Is there more I can do that I can do within my limitations? I'm an ordinary citizen. I did work all my life with P&L. I've retired from P&L. I've been in the Tri-Cities since 1955. I've seen a lot of change, and I like to see our beautiful state get stronger and have a voice in what's happening. And so I thank you personally very much for illuminating what we are doing as a state, and I hope to contribute more to that. And that's what I have to say.
Well, Margaret, I think you've given all of us some inspiration. I hope people are still showing up to town halls and participating in their democracy when they're nearly 90. And I thank you for the feedback and for the comments. And, you know, as I said in the beginning, I very much believe in the promise of this country. You know, I'm the first black attorney general in Washington state history, the first black public elected official. You know, my parents got married in 1969 in the wake of Loving v. Virginia, which was the law or the Supreme Court decision that overturned bans on interracial marriage. You know, my story is a very American story. My existence as a person is because of the Supreme Court. You know, but for that action, my parents' love would have been illegal in most of the country, half the country. You know, and I started my career in uniform. I very much believe in what we can do as a country, and we have failed at so many things as a country. And we have a lot of bad history that we need to embrace and learn from rather than erase from our history books. But I do think that the ways that we not only survive this moment but thrive are continuing to come to these sorts of things and continuing to engage with each other. And, you know, you made a mention of, you know, emailing or contacting your representative. I'm telling you, that makes a difference. And maybe less so when it comes to Congress. Like any one person's ability to impact a federal piece of legislation, or certainly what the president is doing, like none of us, myself included, are going to really do much to change the president's opinion about things. But when, you know, if a third of the people in this room all emailed their state representative about some bill or some priority or some need or concern, I'm telling you, having worked in Olympia, that has a huge impact. Or if you travel to Olympia on a legislative day and, you know, talk to see your representative, they are much more responsive and in tune to what's happening in their community, and I've seen that have an impact. It's not always going to work out the way that you want, but I do think it's important. And the other thing I would say is the vast majority of our lawsuits, just as an AG's office, it depends on our ability to tell the story of the public and the people that are impacted by some of these actions. And that's part of the reason I wanted to be here, is to hear, you know, what's happening in this community and the concerns you're having. But, we bring lawsuits and we can talk about the impact to cuts to the Department of Education because we've heard the stories from teachers and students, and we brought the challenge, protecting some of the grant funding because of the stories that people are telling. And so part of the things that you guys can help me provide is knowing and hearing these stories and telling the impact. And that has a huge, that makes a huge difference in the quality and the type of our litigation that we bring. And so there's a lot of different ways, and not everybody feels comfortable coming to town halls or emailing the representatives, but I do think there's so much power in that. And then if you can't do that, continue to talk to your friends and neighbors, to be that honest voice, that beacon. I think that makes a difference. I really do.
I apologize, I was prepared for everything but a podium. And please give me grace in advance.
Absolutely. You got it.
If you or somebody you love lives in a mobile home, please raise your hand. Because this isn't about one trailer park. I am no senator's son, but I am a fortunate one. I changed that CCR lyrics because I know what it means to come from nothing. I was adopted from Guatemala, a girl who barely spoke, but I was raised by a man who taught me to work for everything I got. He was brought up in the Great Depression, and we did not have a lot of money. But he taught me, if you see something wrong, you don't stay silent. He left me a spine at the age of 92 or 3. That was always the plan. I am more fortunate than most of my neighbors. Why? Because I have a family that shows up. Even the kind of connections that gets a book signed by a man from Utah, a man who governed Massachusetts and once ran for president. But I don't care about his name. I care about his son, the one who married my niece. He taught me how to drive stick. He sat with my dad in the ER and translated the medical terms that we did not understand. Because of that family, I found this home in 2021. I live at the Sands Mobile Home Park here in Pasco, Washington. I was supposed to rent to own the home from them, but then I got sick. Even though we pay annually, for 2 years, we were on good terms with the owners. Then First Commercial Properties Northwest took over. For the past 2 years, our water pressure has failed. At first, they blamed me that it was just my pipes. Now, the owner himself has finally admitted that there are problems. Thanks to Leo in Pasco County City Hall, Tri-Cities Herald, and the Hispanic News. But now the owners are dragging their feet. I tried to get help, meet and mediate. Instead, I received 2 cease and desist letters. Meanwhile, my neighbors are too afraid to come, to complain, and even show up today. Too afraid to even call the police, so they call me. I'm on Social Security. I've been harassed by the owners and management. I've been hospitalized twice from the stress of fighting for this park. But I'm still here. I apologize. Because this mobile home park saved my life when I was so close to giving up. And now I'm trying to return the favor. I don't just help with complaints. They trust me with their lives to write their praise, to stand with them in court. I am not that quiet little Guatemalan anymore. I am a woman who has found her voice, and I'm not afraid to use it, especially when the others are too scared to use theirs. If I have to sacrifice my home to make this heard, I will. I don't take full credit because I have an army, a family, spanning decades and the world. Because my dad did not just teach me to speak up, but to serve my community since the age of 3 and even today. And that is the real inheritance my father gave me. I am asking you, Mr. Nick Brown, on behalf of my personal community for your help. We are lacking this very basic human right, availability running water, especially for our elderly, children, infants, and the ill. And we are not the only mobile home park suffering. Thank you.
Thank you for your bravery and sharing your story, and let's connect afterwards so I can get more information about the specifics. We have tools to enforce housing-related issues. We have a specific state law that provides protections in people in mobile home communities, so let's make sure we connect afterwards. Thank you. Okay. Let me just, I keep moving away from you. I should just move the mic. I know we have some closing remarks from folks, but let me just say thank you to everyone who asked a question. I know there are probably others who wanted to ask a question, but I really appreciate everyone sharing their stories, and hopefully we can have these conversations throughout my time as Attorney General, but I really do very much appreciate being here and being welcomed and being back in Tri-City. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Nick Brown, for being here tonight. Thank you to all of you who took time on a sweltering Monday night to be here and make your voices heard. Not all of us will get to argue in front of the Supreme Court, but every one of us has something to contribute, whether it's calling Congress, canvassing for local candidates, speaking to our neighbors about issues, attending a civility caucus, or registering voters. To borrow a line from Benjamin Franklin, we have our republic, let's keep it. Thank you and good night.